The next section of the website that we're going to look at is the main content, which is going to sit in the middle underneath my nav bar. So you can have all different setups for main content. I'm going to just look at creating a couple of columns of content in here, and the main thing once again is just looking at how to position that so it's all nicely packed together, layered one after the other, and responsive. So once again I need to create some divs. I've now got my div class navigation, and I'm going to start creating some div classes of rows and columns, which is where my content is going to go. The first one I'm going to call div class row, and this is going to be where the row of headers goes for my div tag and my content. Inside that class I'm going to create a second class, which is going to be the columns where the content actually sits. So I've created a header, which is going to sit at the top of my content, and then a paragraph, which is just going to have the text that goes underneath. So just some random paragraph text there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my column content, and I'm going to repeat it because I want to have more than one column appear in my website. So I could have one, I could have two, I could have three, four, five. I'm just going to have 3 columns of content. And then you'll notice here the row div ends at the end. So all of these headers, all of these columns are going to have the one row, which is how I'm going to get these 3 headings to go side by side. Just going to change the 2 other headings so they don't look the same. And now I'm going to style this. I'm going to go to my main.css. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take these 3 columns and I want to float them left and have 1, 2, 3 all in the middle of my page there. So in CSS, I'm going to remember what's the div class. The div class is column. So I'm going to go back to CSS. And that's what I'm going to talk to. So as I mentioned, I want it to float left. I want to choose the width of the page it's going to take up. So of each column, what width do I want it to take? I'm going to say 33.33% width, and you'll see how they go. Now you can change this and play around with different percentages, but you'll notice that when I go too high, they won't fit next to each other. So 33.33 will be the perfect width to get it right from left to right. And then a bit of padding as always to give it that little spacing that makes it look a little bit more professional. Now for me, the 33.33 won't fit with this padding, so I'm going to drop that down. 31's no good. 30's no good. 29 looks pretty good, so I'm going to do 29.5 for my page. Depending on the size of your page and your preview will determine what actually fits. When you stretch, you'll see it starts to resize, but at some point it won't fit, so it's going to drop down. That's normal. Okay, after I've done my column, I'm going to set up my row, which was called row. And I want to get rid of my floats after the columns. So now I want the content after the columns to stop floating. So I'm going to do .row, and I'm going to say after. I've got 2 columns there, so delete that one, that's a mistake. So .row after, and I'm going to say content display as a table and clear both. So this line here is simply clearing the floats after the columns. So it's not going to affect what I put next underneath it. That float is not going to affect anything else. Now, one other thing that you could add is, let's say this was being looked at on a phone or something with a really small screen. You could write a bit of CSS here that actually stacks these one on top of the other instead of placing them left to right. That means if you're looking at it on a phone, you'd have About Us, Main Content underneath, Reviews underneath. So what does that look like? So don't worry too much about this code because you've never seen it before, but this is how you would get it to work responsively on a smaller screen. So what I've written here is media. So at the media, the screen, a screen with a max width of 600 pixels, so pretty small. If that's the criteria is met of 600 pixels max, then the column is going to have a width of 100%, which means this column will take up the whole 600 pixels. This one will then go underneath. This one will then go underneath. So that's going to help you if you're using it on a mobile phone. So there I've created my 3 main sections of content that I want. Now if I wanted that to take up more real estate, I could obviously add more to my paragraph text here. I could also delete one of these, which would make this a column of 2, and then you'll need to work out your spacing though to figure out how you want these to be positioned, because the float left is going to keep these 2 obviously next to each other. So let's say we want to try and play around with this. I'm going to go back to my main CSS. And here I've got width of 29%. Let's try that at 50%. 45%. So we'll see there the 45% gets these 2 columns here. And then you might want to do some center text up here to get your headers right in the middle if you're not happy with that look.